This is Christian Book Blurb, brought to you by author and songwriter Matt McChlery. Get a behind-the-scenes glimpse into the lives of some of your favourite Christian authors, hear about their books and faith. Also, why not check out my website, mattmcclery.com. Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the Christian Book Blurb podcast, where we like to encourage you in your discipleship one book at a time as we meet some amazing Christian authors and learn about their books, their lives, and their faith. I'm your host, Matt McChlery. Thank you for joining me today. Now, on today's show, I'm going to be talking about how to live for Jesus in a changing culture with the author Stephen McAlpine. So welcome, Stephen, to the show.
Great to be with you, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
It's really good to be here with you today. Just so our listeners know, I'm currently sat in a wet UK, and you're sat in sort of evening time New Zealand. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, and probably a lot colder than you. We had -5 the other morning, which for this Australian is is low.
Yeah. So you live in Australia, is that correct?
Yes, I'm originally from Northern Ireland, but live in Australia. Live in Perth on the west coast, but I'm a interim senior pastor of a church while the senior pastor's on sabbatical for 3 months. And it just happened to be the 3 months that are going to coincide with 3 of the coldest months of the year. So, but that's in Christchurch. So it's fun, but it's just different to Perth. It's very different.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm sure we'll talk more about your life in Australia and everything a bit later on. But let's just speak about your new book, because that is really exciting. It's really intriguing. It's called Futureproof. And I just wanted to ask, in a nutshell, what do you mean by the word future-proof? Can anything be certain in an uncertain and changing world?
Well, not a lot, I think. But I call it future-proof because of the fact that Jesus said that he would build his church and the gates of hell would not prevail against it. And at a time when every census data shows a draining away of attendees in churches, the other title I wanted, but I think it had been taken previously, was Does the Future Have a Church? Not does the church have a future, but does the future have a church? And some people think maybe not, and lots of people hope not, as well in our culture. So and that encapsulates all of those political, cultural, sociological issues around what is the church and where is it heading as well, I think.
Oh, interesting. And so what caused the initial spark of an idea for you to write this book?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had written a previous book called, shameless plug, Being the Bad Guys, and a lot of it was about the dialed-up temperature against Christianity in the political sphere, at least in the Western world, about how Christian ideas were suddenly not just neutral ideas, but a lot of them were bad. And I wrote this book because I thought in a couple of years since I wrote that first book, things had changed even more in both positive and negative ways. And we live in a culture that's very anxious about change and is going through a lot of change and doesn't have a framework for how to navigate change. And so I wanted to write a book for Christians who were going through the same sorts of changes to give them encouragement, I think, that there's a way forward, and it isn't about bunkering down, and it isn't about giving up. It is about navigating the cultural changes with some confidence because of the gospel.
One of our Western culture's popular mantras, and you mentioned this in the book, is we belong to ourselves. And the notion that you do you, I'll do me, and let's not talk about it or argue about it. This is the idea that to be powerful and successful, we need to be individualistic and selfish. You say in your book, there's a really interesting quote which I really like. You said, "Is there a way out of this mess? A different way of thinking about the world isn't enough on its own. We must immerse ourselves in a community that shapes our practices as well as our thoughts." So what are you saying about the role of the church here?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that you're being discipled by something all of the time, and the way we change, or the way we are changed at a sociological level, I think, is by the cultures that we're immersed in, or the communities that the immersive communities. And you see how technology actually gives you an immersive community online as well, increasingly. But what I am saying is, it is a bracing culture in the modern West, and it is very atomizing, and it is individual in one sense, but it's also a lot of groupthink in another sense. And I think Christian communities that can operate well, that say, we have a different ethic, we have a different hope, and we want to show you what it looks like as we model it together, because it's a good way of living, is going to be a big part of our apologetic in the future. I just think that bad ideas don't work. And we're living in a context where you're supposed to be an individual as much as you can, but you're supposed to love your community. And we all are supposed to do what we want to do, but care for other people. And those two things can't hold. That's what I'm trying to say, is that we're fracturing and coming apart. And the church is a place where we can navigate and play out what it means to be God's people together in ways that actually keeps us together, I think. And that part of the issue is maintaining the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. We have a unity that we didn't make, but we are called to maintain it. And that's a different thing to what the culture has.
Definitely. And as you say, culture is moving and changing really quickly. And I get the sense that they're kind of stumbling around in the dark. As you were saying, these kind of ideas and values that on their own, they sound great. Oh, yeah, look after yourself, do what makes you feel good. But then at the same time, be kind to others and give to charity and all this kind of stuff. There's no joined up thinking there. And I guess being in the church, the difference that the church is becoming more obvious, or it should be.
Where
the church is supposed to be a difference in the world, and not for the sake of being different, but just because we live by a completely different set of values and beliefs to the world around us. So the church should be different and increasingly so, without having to change very much at all. We hold to our beliefs, but our difference in the world is starting to become a bit more amplified. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's right. Two things. First thing is, you still have to disciple people out of the other discipleship culture of the world, even in the church. So church is under pressure that people attend less and would make their disciple, if there was a discipline issue that they were going through because the church said, they might just up and leave, because that's just the way we are culturally. At the same time, I think that as we live as godly people in this age, it starts to show up very differently. And we've taken the Christianized world for granted until it starts to drain off the culture, and then you start to see difference. So issues like forgiveness, big issues. The culture doesn't necessarily think that forgiveness is the best way forward now. In fact, it's a cancel culture, but it doesn't have a framework for forgiveness that we've got, how we navigate forgiveness, reconciliation and restoration. And that's a very Christian way of looking at the world, that the rest of the world assumed for a long time and is now draining off it. And I think it's the rapid discontinuous change that our culture is going through that's making it what I call cultural nausea. It's like a roller coaster. They don't know what's coming next.
And there's something I've been learning myself recently, over the past year or two, is trying to really define what church is, beyond the Sunday meeting, actually nailing it down. And what does the Bible say? And this whole idea of church being family, church being this community, this place where we come together, yes, to worship, but we come together for the other. We don't come together necessarily for ourselves, but we come to give, we come to serve, we come to bless others, and in doing that, we get some of that blessing in return. I don't know, how does this whole concept of church as family and body fit with this
Yeah.
idea of counterculturalism?
Well, I think one things we've got to be careful of is one thing you get is, let's do ninja Christianity. Let's go really deep household church, and we'll junk every other thing, and we'll just live in each other's houses all the time. But the modern world doesn't let us do that. So what I'm saying is, if you can, turning up is 80% of it at church, but the other rest of it is how in the rest of the week are we able to, in small bite-sized ways, thicken up our discipleship process, thicken up our commitment to each other in a world that is quite atomizing. When both of you, say a couple, for example, both have to work a lot to pay the mortgage. And people say, well, only one of you should work. Well, that's fine. Then we have to sell the house and move somewhere else because we can't afford to live here. So the modern Western world is going to take a bite of us. And what I'm saying is, how do you navigate that world in ways that are, you just dial up the meaningfulness of what it means to be community together? How do you keep drip filtering your relationships down through the week, that the church starts to take on more meaning in your life as a community, that you go on Sunday in order to be sent to the rest of the week to live meaningfully and also have touchstone points with each other? That's what we're going to have to do in modern society in the future. Find ways to have stepping stones in our lives through the week that give us meaningful community and hold back the bracing winds of the modern age, I think.
That's good. That's good. Thank you, Stephen. In your book, Futureproof, you also touch on another hot topic, especially here in the UK, but I assume it's widespread because you're obviously living in Australia and you've picked up on it as well. It's this whole idea of the loneliness crisis or the loneliness epidemic. Why do you think we are finding making meaningful relationships more difficult?
I think there are a number of reasons. One of them is time. We feel like we're pressed with time, and there's a great New Yorker cartoon of a man looking at his diary, and there's a busy window of buildings outside, and he's going, "Can't do Tuesday. How about never? Is never good for you?" And it's like, it feels like those things break us down. We also have a very transient culture. If we want to, we move around a lot. And we tend to also isolate ourselves when we get home because the day and the week are so bracing that we kind of shelter away from other people. We also have a hotter political climate that if we disagree with people, we don't quite know how we can navigate that space with other people. So we've become very tribal in the current generation. We're also having smaller families, and we're an aging population. Not everyone. Clearly, migrant communities do community life much, much better. And I'll get into an Uber to go to an airport somewhere, and there's a Sikh or a Muslim taxi driver, an Uber driver, and they just the first thing they want to know is, what do you do? And then when you tell them, they go, "Hey, yeah, us religious people and communities, we've got to stick together," because then they complain about the way the West is anxious and lonely and too busy and doesn't do family. So there's something in the West that has brought this to the surface. And part of the loneliness epidemic is that we don't know how to make connection with people in very thin culture. And it feels like the mediating institutions that would bring us together are fracturing. So all mediating institutions, community groups and things like that, when they start to break apart, Robert Bellah, who coined the term expressive individualism, said at the very time that we are increasing the sacredness of the individual, we're losing the social fabric that can keep individuals together. And I think it's that loss of social fabric over time. It doesn't happen all at once, but it does happen, and that starts to thin us out. And then suddenly it gathers pace, and suddenly you find yourself in an epidemic. It doesn't take much to tip you over into it.
So what can the church do? How can we future-proof against this loneliness crisis?
Yeah. One of the things I say is the church has the great opportunity to do cross-generational, cross-demographic relationships really well because of Jesus. That in my book, one of the reasons I wrote Futureproof was I wanted to see some practical examples of what it looks like to live in the cultural moment. And there are lots of books talking about the cultural moment and how we got there, but not too many they were a bit thin on their ecclesiology and how you live. And I think you can dial up. Like in our church in Australia, we had a +1, which was this semester we'll do one extra thing, and this term it's one meal a month with another family or another group of people in the church, and perhaps invite someone else. And you go, well, one meal a month isn't very much, but in our current climate, the month is the new week.
Yeah.
How fast does your month go? And
Yeah.
if you could do that once, that's 12 meals a year with other people who aren't necessarily just like you and aren't necessarily the people you would normally get together with. And you're starting to dial up the community level. And if everyone in your church was doing that, you would start to get this framework and that was building of people investing in each other's lives. And part of that might be you might need to dial down the busyness of your church. I hate to say that,
Mm.
but you've got to give some people
No,
some
you're
space
right.
to do community.
Yeah, and also we found to evangelize in a way, not necessarily go and stand on a street corner, but to join the bowls club, to join the tennis club, to join the local football group or the scouts, whatever, so that Christians are actually out there rubbing shoulders with people who are not Christians and are forming those relationships, which then
Yeah.
spark conversation and it starts the process of introducing someone to Jesus. So yeah, I think you're right. Sometimes we're just too busy.
And that comes from the top down, by the way. If you've got a leadership team in your church that's too busy running the church that they never have any time and they never have any non-Christian friends, then, the Chinese proverb, the fish rots from the head, uh,
Mm,
that'll be the same down further stream. People will struggle because you're not modeling it. At some level, we have to model a way of doing life in church as leaders that look sustainable for our own lives and for the lives of our people. Because non-Christians aren't going to be thinking, well, if they think, well, if I become a Christian, my life is going to get a lot busier. I think that's a threat, not a promise. If that
mm,
makes
mm,
sense.
yeah, especially in today's world. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, you've got a chapter in your book about ecology.
yeah.
Um, why is it important for the church to care for creation, and why does it matter?
A couple of reasons. I think we were stewards of the creation under God's rule, and that's always been the mandate. So I actually think the creation ecology chapter is a subset of vocation, how we live in this world. But also, I nearly didn't write that chapter. And then at the end, I thought one of the key issues I see everywhere at every university, I see people walking down the street, is almost a religious commitment uh, to the ecology, to the environment, which doesn't have much hope. I've seen lots of end
Mm,
is nigh, sandwich boards on people, but they're not religious. They're actually climate issues. And if you're at a university campus in Australia, I saw it. There are posters that say we are beyond, and it uses an expletive to describe our environment. At the same time that young people are being told, go and get your law degree and get a great career in law, you're trying to hold two things together that you say, well, what's the point? But we've got a
yeah.
good ecological opportunity to say that God loves this environment, but he loves populating it with humans. And the environmental movement has been overtaken by a framework that's highly religious in its language, that's very apocalyptic in its end goal, and sees humans as the problem in the created order, not as part of God's solution. And I think if older Christians go, oh, I don't care, I'll be dead by then anyway, that's not doing a good service to younger Christians who are going,
Mm,
well, how do I navigate that space? How do I use it as a gospel opportunity? And that's why I wrote that chapter, because I think it's going to be important.
yeah. Very good food for thought, definitely. And you also mention technology.
Yeah.
What about technology? Is it something we should fear? I mean, thinking of the recent developments in artificial intelligence and the ills of social media and all of that, or or should the church be engaging? Where do we stand when it comes to future proofing with technology?
That's a great question. It's hard to know where it's all going to go. And in my book, I started a chapter with, I wrote this chapter using ChatGPT. Well, not really, but could you tell? Perhaps you could tell, because I think ChatGPT, you can't be creative in the way that I think I am, at least. Um, and But we shape our tools and then they shape us. There's no doubt about that with technology. And we can navigate technology well as Christians and say, what does it mean to discipline ourselves and steward ourselves in a technological age? There will be great things about technology. And part of that is that technology can isolate us and make us more politically and culturally partisan. But at the same time, I do Instagram reels just with a little thought every day from scripture. And I get people saying, oh, that's great. That's just a little drop in my week where I can touch base. And then I see podcasting. I know there's immersive technologies that we have to think about and think through what they're doing. But technology can be a great servant, but it's a terrible master. And the church could lead the way in showing people how it can be a good servant, not necessarily be mastered by it. And that's like any good thing that's in the created order. But technology is going to change us in other ways that we haven't thought about. I don't think that transgender is the goal of the trans movement. I think transhumanism is. I think the goal of a culture that has lost an idea of an age to come or a transcendence is actually uploading our psychology to a huge cloud where there can't be any death or disease or racism or misogyny. And that's a very thin ecclesiology. So I think we've got to be showing how technology can dehumanize us and preaching against that, speaking against that, writing against that, but also saying, you know what? For every hour of technology we do, we need some face-to-face time, not FaceTime. And eyeballing other people is just a great... look, my son's a classic case. He's a digital native. He's 16. But if I say to him, hey, put the phone down, let's go shoot some hoops, play basketball, he's like a shot. So I think we've used technology as a default to stop our boredom when we could be actually doing that in different ways. And I think part of that's a discipline program. Part of that's the church can teach the world how to do good community that isn't bound just by technology.
That's really good. That's really good. Thank you, Stephen. We've been chatting with Stephen McAlpine about his book, Futureproof. We will be back very shortly after these. Stay tuned.
If you enjoy listening to this podcast, you can help keep it on the web. All you've got to do is buy me a coffee. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/Matt McChlery to make a donation. There is a link in this episode's show notes. So go on, buy me a coffee today and help this podcast to keep supporting Christian books and authors.
Hello, welcome back to the Christian Book Blurb. Today I've been chatting with author Steve McAlpine about how to live for Jesus in a changing culture, based on his new book, Futureproof. Stephen, just before the break, we chatted a lot about your book. Now we like to chat a bit about you as a person and as an author and that sort of thing. I know at the very beginning of the program, you mentioned that you live in Australia, but you're currently helping out in New Zealand for a time. You're just about to move, is that correct?
Yes, moving to Sydney, which is closer to New Zealand than Perth, where I currently live in Australia is. If you fly across Australia, I did 150 days of travel last year, all in Australia, and wow. It just feels vast, and it's 5 or 6 hours trips flights. And if you think about that from England, I don't know where you'd be in Europe on a 6-hour trip. But when I fly from Brisbane to Perth, it's the same country and it's over a whole vast empty landscape. Very different way of thinking about travel and distance, I think, Australia. But moving to Sydney most people live on the east coast of Australia, and most of my work's there. So that's why we're moving there. My daughter isn't, my son is, and my wife is. So Sydney will be our stop-off point, just because of population base and work, I think.
Okay. And what do you do for fun, Stephen?
Oh, fun. I don't write books for fun. I hate to say to people, no, I don't hate to say to people, because all runners will tell you that they're a runner, and I run a lot. And I like to race. I like running races, so I like going and competing.
Is it like short distance, or like do you do marathons? Well, what
I
kind
do
of running?
marathons, and I do anything between 5 kilometers and a marathon. But if I'm going to do a marathon, I have to do 100k weeks for 18 weeks in a row for training, and traveling just absolutely smashes you. So it's shorter distances the last few years. So I do like that, because I do find I've been involved in ministry for a long time, mostly as a pastor and now as a writer and consultant. And I don't listen to music or podcasts when I run. It's just a case of listen to your body rhythm, launder out all the ideas from your mind, pray occasionally. I like that. But that's solo. That's for me. Occasionally I run with other people. But with my wife, we like modernist art. We like modernist architecture, and we like sort of those kind of things. So we like hanging out, just going to a museum or a gallery or something like that.
Oh, nice. Favorite foods?
Favorite foods would be my wife is from Cape Town in South Africa, so that's a blend of everything, right?
My word. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I had grandparents who lived in Cape Town, so I've been there many times. So.
Oh, right, I've
Yeah,
never
go on.
been. How about that? But
Wow.
you get a good blend of eclectic curries, and you get lots of Malaysian influences, as you know, from if you've been there. And so there are many good dishes. And I wasn't there for Mother's Day the other day, but my mother-in-law made a milk tart, which is a South African favorite.
Those are gorgeous.
Yeah, and there's technology
Have you
comes in. Sorry.
I was going to say, have you ever had Cook Sisters before?
Yes, I have. And my father-in-law made them a few months ago. And what I liked, right, was technology was great, because my whole family was sitting there and I was on WhatsApp watching all the great food that they'd cooked. But I didn't get any of it because I'm sitting in New Zealand, right? But technology giveth and taketh away at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah. So my wife and son are coming to Sydney. My wife's a clinical psychologist. So I'm 56. We've been married 28 years, so half my life.
Great. Oh, congratulations. That's great. What is the Holy Spirit doing in your life or saying to you at the moment that you're able to share with us?
That's a really good question. I've been thinking about that as I've gotten near 60. That one of the things that happens to men my age in ministry, not just ministry, but we become very entitled. We think we're owed something. And that plays out in people's lives in destructive ways, but also in sophisticated, arrogant ways. And I recognise that I'm a bit of a wordsmith, and I recognise that I've got the confidence to say things to people, and I'm asking God to make me, to temper my entitlements, I think. And because I don't want to be hardened as I get older. My mum is probably my primary example of someone who's a Christian, nearly 80, who's still growing and learning and wanting to be more like Jesus. I'd hate to atrophy coming up to 60 as think I've arrived, because it feels like at this stage of life, God is saying, keep running. Keep running the race. Even if I physically slow down, I don't want to become flabby spiritually into my 60s, because I meet enough people who are, and I don't want to be like that, because I don't want to lose the zeal for godliness, for lovingness. I don't want to be a grumpy old man. I don't want to be entitled. And I think that's something that I've been praying about recently.
We're approaching the end of our time together, but before we go, where can people find you on? Are you on social media? Have you got websites? Where can people buy your book, Futureproof?
Yes. First on the book, Futureproof and Being the Bad Guys is by the Good Book Company. So that will be .com or .co.uk or .com.au, and probably all good bookstores or Amazon. So, but the Good Book Company will definitely have stock in the UK, US, and Australia. My new website's coming out in a few weeks' time, so I'll park that one there. But if people want to read my blog, it's Stephen with a PH, StephenMcAlpine.com. And I'm on Instagram, but I can never remember my handle. But all the links will be on my website, which is coming up. But my blog is probably the thing that got me writing when I was a pastor still. And I just jotted things down, and eventually it editors wend their way to my site and ask, would you write a book on this stuff? And so that's what I've done. So I think my blog is probably my primary way of doing things. My website that's coming out in a few weeks will have more details, but definitely Futureproof and Being the Bad Guys you can get that from the Good Book Company.
Thanks, Stephen. And for the benefit of our listeners, I'll put a link to Stephen's blog and also his website, because I know that at the time of recording this podcast, by the time it actually goes live, I'm pretty sure the website will be out there and available. So I'll put a link
That's exciting.
to that as well. Yeah.
I'm excited in anticipation.
So, yeah, thanks, Stephen. Thanks for that. And do go and check that out and grab yourself a copy of Stephen McAlpine's book, Futureproof. And was it Being the Bad Guys?
Being the Bad Guys, indeed.
Being the Bad Guys. Yeah, really good. So, well, thank you, Stephen. It's been a great time chatting with you today and picking your brains about all things culture and future. It's been an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. It was great to be with you across the miles.
And thank you as well for joining us and tuning into this episode of Christian Book Blurb. I look forward to having the pleasure of your company again really soon. Don't forget that this podcast comes out twice a month, on the 1st and the 15th. So we'll be back again really soon with another edition of the Christian Book Blurb, where I'll be speaking to another Christian author about their books, their life, and their faith. Thanks for listening. See you soon. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to Christian Book Blurb with your host, Matt McChlery. Do give it a like, give it a share, and let your friends know all about it. We do hope to see you again soon on another Christian Book Blurb.